I played 150 games at Week 15, and the set has only come out 1 week ago. This is how to play all 6 of the new leaders, as well as how I think that the meta is going to shake up once everything is settled. Usually I like to do these kinds of meta breakdown videos outside in some nice sorts of locations, but because this one's going to be so information dense, I decided to take it back home so I can have my script off to the side. However, to satisfy your thirst for something interesting on the screen, I have sunglasses, which doesn't really solve the problem, but I had sunglasses. And guys, I want to let you know that I've made a decision. When this channel reaches 33333, that's 33,333 subscribers, 1/3 of my lifetime goal, which even while doing this channel I thought would never be possible, I will be doing YouTube full time. Even in videos where I don't talk about my job, I've had so many people, so many warm comments talking to me about how happy they would be if I took that next step. And so now I'm in the process of getting ready to do so. And honestly, these sponsors, as well as you watching, are what's going to help me make this dream come true. So genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much to this video's sponsor, optcg. Now on my channel, I value authenticity. I try to be myself on camera, tell you exactly how I think that a deck is without trying to clickbait you, although sometimes I do some of that. So instead of trying to sell you on why optcg is the greatest browser, which it is, I will tell you candidly exactly how I've been using it ever since I've switched over. Of course, we all like a little bit of customization, whether it's the wallpapers, the background music, keyboard sounds, the tab sounds, splash screens. There's also frankly an incredible amount of customization you could have with just the tab sounds. The UI icons, the GX icon itself, even shaders or the custom cursor, which don't actually have to adhere to one single theme. You can actually mix and match themes to choose exactly which parts of which themes you like the most. I can wager a bet that above customizability, you really value the functionality and optimization of your browser. I bet if you were to open up your task manager right now, you'll see your browser at the top eating all of your memory. However, that's not actually going to be the case with optcg because optcg is very well optimized, specifically made for people who are going to be doing lots of multitasking. And this is further exemplified by some of the features that are built into the browser as well. The video pop-out feature, for example, takes a video off of optcg and puts it on top of your desktop, meaning that you no longer have to put your phone off to the side of your computer to watch a video while you multitask. This, alongside the split screen capability, makes it really easy for you to be able to multitask. No need to keep flipping through tabs or changing desktops to see what you missed on the video that you were watching. You can have it all on one screen if and only if you're using the optcg browser. So get off your old browser today that's eating all of your memory and get on the browser that I have recently switched over to and currently have no intention of going back. Thank you once again to optcg for sponsoring this video, and thank you so much for your support up until now because I could not have gotten here without you as well. Supporting my sponsors all supports me, so I really appreciate it if you do. Let's get back into the very, very long video. And OP15, like OP14, has a lot of extremely viable leaders. I think that actually all 6 of these leaders have a spot within the meta, but I do think that some of them are going to stand out more than others, and some are going to have some shortcomings. This video, of course, is going to be my opinions, and also, of course, because it's only been 1 week of the meta, I may end up being completely wrong on my read on the meta. However, this is a lot of testing for just 1 week into the meta, so I feel like for people who want a little bit of a head start into OP15, you are in the right place. Now, to start things off with this video, because it's the Sky Island set and therefore, in a way, Kami, God's Island, let's first bring this to God's domain, the shrine, and test my luck with Japanese fortune telling. See how I'm going to do in this set. And if you don't know how Japanese fortune telling works, you basically shake this box, you get a stick, and you get a piece of paper with the same number as the stick, and it's that simple. I have gotten my fortune. I've not looked at it yet, but I think this is going to be very important for the upcoming OP15 meta because it's going to be very related to Kami. Okay, so this is pretty bad. So Kichi is the second worst thing that you could get, but Kyo is the worst thing you get. So I was like, wait, why are there both of those things there? But it's in between the 2 worst things I get. So maybe technically it's the second worst thing I could have gotten. And if you get a bad fortune, make sure to tie it on these ropes to make sure that it doesn't actually come true, as they'll be burned later on, which means that hopefully I'll be a little bit more lucky in OP15. Still, like absolving the sins of OP14 and OP13, we move on to OP15 with a blank slate with the past burned away. However, while new demons may enter this domain, we can't forget the old ones that already exist among us. And as such, let's recontextualize the OP14 meta before we jump into what's going to change with OP15. The OP14 meta in the East, that is OP14, EB03, and EB04 fully usable, resulted in a rather diverse meta despite a pretty big elephant in the room. Mihawk, Ace, and Ema have had their thrones challenged, as Nami and Roshinante have risen up with the new EB04 and EB03 buffs. Blue Yellow Hancock is a deck that was already considered top tier in the East thanks to the EB03 Nami being playable from a very early stage in this meta, but has become even stronger with the EB04 Borsellino now being usable. This 5-cost Borsellino I personally think should never have existed, but if you want to see a whole video where I talk about that, that video is going to be in the description below. This card is able to heal you, become a blocker, as well as have the Egghead type, meaning that it is playable off of the Ira Quasar help trigger, meaning that many yellow decks right now are teching in that 5-cost Borsellino as well as the Quasar to have that off chance of triggering it out of life, or even putting it into your life yourself with things like the 2-cost Hiyori. With this all being said, OP14, despite some very powerful and annoying decks to fight against, has a rather diverse meta, making it very difficult to actually tier list the decks. Still, these are the decks that I think are the most relevant in a general tier list of how they would compare next to each other when just looking at these top decks. Yes, there are some other really powerful decks like Blue Purple Sanji, which I think deserves more representation than he actually had, but at least in terms of play rate, this is the OP14 meta that we are playing with before we go into OP15. And thankfully, once we get OP15, the East and the West are now going to be on the same release schedule, meaning that this is going to be very, very relevant for you. And with the new OP15 leaders, I think that this is going to be how the meta is going to play out. Let me explain, because there's going to be a couple of surprising things on this list. Remember that just because I rank a leader high or low doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be correct. This is, of course, only 1 week of testing, essentially. Though I do have many games on these leaders, I do think that meta is going to shift a lot. And of course, the meta isn't necessarily going to be the product of the best decks, but it's going to be the culmination of how the best decks interact with each other. Therefore, even if you have a really solid deck on paper, if it doesn't do well into the established meta, it doesn't actually make it a good deck. This means that the meta that I envision may completely change depending on one single deck that you would need to tech for. So this can all be completely wrong in a couple of months, but if I'm right, you heard it here first. The first thing you may notice is that Hancock is no longer in the S tier for me, though this deck is still very, very strong on paper due to the fact that it has exceptional triggers, exceptional survivability, as well as exceptional board presence and finishing power. I do think that the biggest threat in this meta, Purple Enel, does have a pretty favored matchup into Hancock, and therefore if you consider the play rate of Purple Enel, I no longer think that Hancock is going to be the undisputed best deck of this meta should Enel's popularity last. Not only this, but Lucy and Luffy, while I would say are maybe 50-50, still can be a bit scary if the game goes on longer, or specifically if these decks find the cards that they need. Luffy, like the ST29 yellow Luffy, can outlast Hancock given enough time, and Lucy having access to the Blue Jet pistol, which I'm sorry I forget the name of in English, gives him the means to be able to deal with Hancock's board as well. Not only this, but due to the fact that Lucy also has a lot of resources, you can deal with a lot of these smaller attacks that Hancock can dish out. It's for this reason that I think that both of these decks have the potential to do well into Hancock, but due to the fact that it's still early meta and these deck lists are still being refined, they're not quite yet at that point. So considering the bad Enel matchup as well as the other two matchups that, while 50-50 right now, feel a little bit scary, I have put Hancock firmly in the A tier now. Mihawk was a deck that I was rating a lot higher in my early testing for OP15 due to the fact that it has a pretty solid matchup into Purple Enel. However, because Lucy exists within this meta, I don't necessarily think that he can really survive, as the other matchups have not changed from OP14, and Lucy is another matchup that you have to worry about now. All the power reduction that Lucy has at his disposal is going to be very difficult for a deck like Mihawk to actually deal with. The other deck that you probably noticed has fallen completely off a cliff is, unfortunately, Black Emu, and a lot of people would know that I really enjoy this deck, regardless of if it was strong. In EB04, although I do think it was solid, it had some pretty difficult matchups in Hancock and Mihawk, and despite that, I was playing the deck because I just really enjoy the playstyle. I like the complexity as well as the mirror, though I wasn't able to play it as much anymore. And unfortunately, the Purple Enel matchup is devastating for Emu. And although the Lucy matchup is good for Emu, if some of these other decks like Yellow Luffy come into the meta as well, these again are matchups that you don't really want to be hitting as Emu, as you just don't have a means of getting rid of the opponent's larger characters, whether it's the 6-cost Enel or any of the Sky Island characters that Luffy has. This isn't to say that the Sky Island Luffy matchup is abysmal like the Enel matchup is, but just due to the fact that Enel's play rate is so high right now, I can't justify putting even anything above B tier due to the fact that the Hancock matchup and the Enel matchup, which I believe right now are going to be the two most popular decks within the meta, are pretty bad for Emu now. Still, while Emu has fallen out of the meta in my opinion, that doesn't mean that there aren't other fun decks that we can cope. And while I may be having a deck out into the crisis as I try a lot of fun decks, it is exciting to have a couple of new things to test best in the meta as well. Ace is a deck that, like the other decks that we've mentioned so far, have not received any buffs in OP15, but I believe has become a little bit better in OP15 due to the fact that the 6,000 power stat line, as well as the insane amount of resources that Ace has at his disposal, is really, really strong within this meta. I don't necessarily think that this makes Ace a top tier deck, as the Hancock matchup is still problematic just due to the fact that you have 3 life total, but the 6,000 power stat line is good into Yellow Luffy, as well as other random sorts of rogue decks that are coming back into the meta to try to counter some of the new meta stuff like Black Crocodile or Purple Doflamingo, but he also has the resources to be able to play the War of Attrition with Lucy. Really, it's just the Hancock matchup that you need to worry about, but because the Hancock matchup is still going to be relevant at least for now in the beginning of OP15, but I think it's better situated in the meta now than it was back in OP14. Other than this, looking at the decks that were buffed with EB03 and EB04 in blue-yellow Nami as well as purple-yellow Roshinante, these two decks have kind of flipped in their rankings. I think that Nami, similar to the reason why I think for that red-blue ace is better in this meta, Nami is also pretty solid just due to the fact that it's very easy to make your leader 7,000 power. Roshinante, on the other hand, because he relies so much on having equal or less dong than the opponent, unfortunately because purple Enel only goes up to 6 dong, it's very difficult to actually get your effects off, making this matchup difficult as well, meaning that for me, Roshinante has fallen off the tier list. And while I would like to just sit here and talk about every single deck on this tier list, it's going to take an extremely long time to actually do that in this video. So if you don't want to see me talk about things like yellow Karagata or green carrot, purple Doflamingo, blue yellow ace, these other cope decks that I've tried within the meta to see if I could crack it in some way, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll make that a separate video. The cope decks of OP15, at least the ones that I've tried so far, because really there are a lot of decks that I think could be a potential meta breaker, but I haven't found the right list yet, or the meta isn't quite right for them yet. Still, if or when one of these decks does manage to find its way into the top tiers, I think that a lot of this could end up changing. So once again, don't take this as gospel. So really, OP15 has 6 pretty solid leaders that just have very slight differences in the way that they interact with the meta, or their consistency, or their total power output, their resources, lots of small factors that go into these decisions of whether or not I think a deck is good or not. So without further ado, with this stage set, let's talk about the first leader, one of the main characters of this set, the Sky Island leader himself, Purple Enel. Enel is a purple 5,000 power 5 life leader with the effect. Under the rules of this game, your Don deck consists of 6 cards. Activate main once per turn. If it is the second turn or later, add up to 1 Don card from your Don deck and set it as active, and add up to 4 additional Don cards and rest them. Then give up to 4 rested Don to one of your characters. Essentially from turn 2, if you played a 1 cost on turn 1, then with your leader effect, you'll be able to hit with your leader as well as that 1 cost character every single turn. Additionally, the ramp that comes as a byproduct of your leader effect on that second turn when it's activated, you can also play some higher cost characters. However, because you can only have 6 Dong in your Don deck, you're limited to cards that are only 6 costs or less. Though you may think that this means that Enel's cards are going to be rather weak, as you're gated out of being able to play these 8, 9, or 10 cost characters. But in OP15, 2 6 cost Enels were introduced. Starting with the first one, which is generally going to be the first one that you're going to want to play out in the game, the Searcher Secret Rare 6 cost Enel. This 6 cost 8,000 power character cannot be removed from the field by the opponent's effects and gains plus 2,000 power if you have 6 or less Dong cards on the field. Technically, this means that it is generic, but for Enel, you're always going to be at 6 or less Dong cards, so this card's always going to be a 6 cost 10,000 power that cannot be removed by effects. On play, Dong -1, look at the top 5 cards on the top of your deck and add up to 1 card from your hand. Then place the rest of the bottom of your deck in any order and trash 1 card from your hand. This search is similar to Luffy's The Man Who Will Become King of the Pirates that blue-purple Sanji can use, in that you can look at the top cards, add any card to your deck, and because there's no restriction on the type of card that can be added to your hand, this card is not revealed to your opponent. However, though the 6 cost 10,000 with the search is very powerful, you do have to trash 1 card at the end, meaning that your hand size is not actually neutral, you are still going down by 1 for every time that you play this Enel. This demerit of losing 1 card from your hand is also true for the super rare Enel. This card has the same top effect as the secret rare Enel, not being able to be removed and gaining plus 2,000 power, but the activate main effect, if you reduce 1 Dong, this character gains blocker, then you have to trash 1 card. However, because just about every single other card within this deck is card neutral, this effect of trashing 1 card from your hand is almost necessary to actually balance out the deck. Balance is a term that you should probably use pretty lightly when you're talking about purple Enel, because this deck is not just about the 6 costs that it plays, because there's so many good 1 costs in this deck, and one card that we're going to talk about that's an insanely powerful 3 costs in this deck. Enel in the manga has 4 priests, as you may remember from the Skypiea arc: Om, Shura, Satori, and Gedatsu. And all 4 of these cards have the same on-play effect. On play, you return one of your Don cards to your Don deck, and then you draw 1 card, meaning that this is just a 1-cost 2000 that is card neutral, which on its own is okay, but it's essentially the same as a Searcher, plus the demerit of having to reduce 1 Don. However, in Purple Enel specifically, it's really good because of your leader effect being able to attach 4 rested Don every single time they use your leader effect from turn 2 onward. However, of course, these cards have additional effects as well to differentiate from each other. Gedatsu has the ability to KO one of the opponent's 2000 power or less characters when he himself is KO'd. Shura has Rush. Satori has the on-attack effect of being able to reorder the top 2 cards in your deck. And probably the strongest of these 4 priests has the ability to reduce one of the opponent's characters by 1000 power. Now, the core of the Enel deck is to play out these 1 costs in the early game, and then when you get to that 6 stone turn, which is turn 3 if you're going first or second thanks to your leader effect, to just keep playing out the 6-cost Enels until you run out or the opponent is dead. Because all of your characters return 1 Don card to your Don deck, your leader effect giving you back 1 Don as active and the rest as rested is actually relevant because you're always going to have at least 1 Don that'll come back as active, which you can use to either play out 1 more 1-cost or of course to just attach to your leader or a character to get that little bit of extra damage. And so the gameplay loop for Enel is rather rudimentary. You play your 1-cost in the early game and then you spam your 6-cost Enels. But the real differentiation from good Enels and great Enels is going to be how you use your events. Enel has been given a wealth of exceptionally powerful event cards, whether it's Vadi that has the ability to draw a card and then give one of your characters +2 cost, Elthor which gives one of your characters or leader +1000 power, then KOs one of the opponent's 3000 power or less characters, Lightning Beast Kiten which draws you a card and reduces one of the opponent's characters by 1000 power, Lightning Dragon which freezes one of the opponent's characters that has a power of 6000 or less, and Mamaragang, the first SR event that we've had since New Genesis in Green Uta. However, because we are now in Block 4, the new generation is here, and this card is much, much stronger than just a free search. It is essentially just a free 1000 counter, because as a counter event, it gives you plus 1k and draws you 1 card, but the main effect is also exceptionally powerful, and one of the reasons why Ima is so bad in this meta, the ability to not only draw 1 card, but then also being able to rest the opponent's 5000 power or less characters. And once again, even though you are reducing a lot of Dong for these effects, because you're always going to get them back with your leader effect, the amount of Dong that you reduce essentially doesn't matter all too much as long as you make sure that you have 6 Dong on that next turn, assuming that you want to play the 6-cost NL after. Still, really, this deck, though simple in what it does with its characters, is extremely complicated in how you manage and use your events, because some of these events are also 2k counters for your leader or character NL. With things like Lightning Beast Dragon into Mamaragang, you can now rest a 6000 power. Mamaragang into Lightning Dragon, you can rest and then lock one of the opponent's characters. A combination of power reduction, whether it's Kiten or Olmu or even Divine Departure, which a lot of people are running right now, into El Thor to be able to get rid of them immediately. There's so many different and intricate ways you can use your events, and managing not only your hand, but also which cards you're going to need to hold onto to get these proper combos off at the right time is extremely difficult. Truly, this is one of the most technical decks that we've had in quite a while. The baseline power of this deck is so powerful that a lot of people may not even notice the actual difficulty of it. Still, in the list that I am presenting in this video, you may notice that I'm not running Gedatsu and instead running the 1-cost Pudding. This is very standard, so I'm not going to say that this is something that I came up with. But this card lets you search the top 4 cards for an event card or Sanji. This is another reason why some people are also taking in the 6-cost 2k counter Sanji. But essentially, Pudding is just another way to actually find specifically the combo pieces that you need in your events, because those event combos are going to be extremely valuable, while of course being hand neutral and importantly being a 1-cost 2000 power stat line that doesn't actually reduce your dong, meaning that in the early game if you play this Pudding out, you actually have 1 extra dong on the second turn to be able to use for extra large attacks. And all of this culminates into Purple Enel, a deck that seems very simple on the surface in what it does, but is very intricate and very difficult to actually pull out the maximum amount of power. This, alongside how difficult the mirror is, makes this for sure one of the premier picks if you are a competitive player in OP15. Even if you aren't an extremely competitive player, the sheer power of this deck alone can carry you very, very far. And while this deck alone would have been very well situated, a card that personally I think breaks this deck, and in my opinion actually is the strongest card within this deck, which I may even just make an entire video talking about, is the 3-cost Holy. This fucking dog, 3 cost 4000, which gives your Ohm and Holy himself double attack and makes them 6000 power on the opponent's turn, is so insanely strong in this deck, because the 6000 power on the opponent's turn makes it really difficult to actually take back. But because of your leader effect, this isn't just a 3 cost 4000 double attack character that you kind of ignore. No, this is minimum 3 cost 8,000 double attack every single turn because you can't get rid of the character that's 6,000 power easily. Because if you spend your time trying to get rid of this dog, then you're going to be losing tempo as eventually his board becomes much bigger with these 6 cost 10,000 power Enels. However, because this Holy played on turn 2, whether you're going first or second, can immediately on turn 3, which again would be your 5 dunk turn, or if you're going second, your 6 dunk turn, hit for 8,000 power, or if you decide to attach the active dunk you get back from your leader effect onto Holy, 9,000 power, the opponent has to be ready for this, or they're going to have to take 2 life in the early game. This 2 life against Enel is extremely important because against Enel, your life value is the most important thing that you have to your name. You want to be absorbing the 6 cost Enel's hits with your life and countering the rest of the attacks so you actually have enough time to beat Enel. This is easier said than done because you're going to have to be dealing with minimum 2 attacks, one from the leader and one from the character which the dong is attached to from your leader effect. But if you can manage to absorb all these 6 cost Enel's hits into your leader, then you can stall a reasonable amount of time to be able to win back because again, these 6 cost Enel's trashing one card when they use their effect makes it so that Enel, though he does seem impervious at first, slowly fizzles out like the spark that he is. And so if you have this Holy that was played on turn 2, hit and get a double attack through on the opponent's leader, the game could potentially just be as good as over because those are 2 hits that you're not absorbing the 6 cost Enel's attacks, meaning that essentially it almost feels like you lose 1 or even 2 turns earlier than you usually would because of this Holy. Not only this, but because it's so hard to get rid of, because removal's so bad in this meta, because the 6 cost Enel once again cannot be removed by effects, this Holy has a lot of sticking power on the board as well, meaning that even if the first one is, whether it's blocked or negated in some way, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to do that every single turn as the attacks are getting bigger and bigger. And while I've probably spent about half of this video talking about Enel at this point, saying how insanely broken this deck is, which it is, I can't really say that this deck is impervious because there are certain types of cards that do really well into this deck. Now, setting aside how powerful Holy is, this deck is very binary in the types of cards that it plays. 1 cost and 6 cost makes it very easy to deal with if you're a deck that's good at locking or controlling the opponent's smaller sized board. Green in particular with things like the 3 cost Electrical Luna or the Supernova variant, the Mini Luna, or even things like 5 cost Carrot, in yellow, the 4 cost Piranha, all of these cards are really good at managing the opponent's board and can really heavily slow down the aggression that Enel has. So while this deck has some certain counter cards, the deck is extremely consistent once it can get going. If you have that secret rare 6 cost Searcher Enel, you can just keep spamming Enels throughout the entire game, and a lot of the times the sheer power of the deck, 6 cost 10,000 unmovable Enels as well as this stupid fucking dog, is insanely powerful, and that is why I think that this deck is tier 0 right now. If you can manage to go first as Enel, I don't think that there are many decks that can really beat you. However, still, one thing that you may know if you've also been following the manga is that Rubber is unaffected by lightning. So let's talk about one of the decks that does actually beat Enel, and that is Yellow Luffy. Luffy is a yellow 5,000 power 5 life leader. If your Sky Island type character with 6,000 base power or more would be removed from the field by your opponent, you may add 1 card from the top of your life to your hand instead. First major thing to note with this leader is that it's not protection against being removed by the opponent's effects. It is being removed by the opponent. Period. This means that even removal via combat to a Sky Island type character with 6,000 base power or more would be eligible to you using your leader effect and therefore saving the character. This effect on its own is very strong into removal decks like Black Lucci. However, due to the fact that purple NL exists and 6 cost NL also isn't removable, we haven't really seen any black removal decks. Therefore, you may think that this leader effect is just not very good into the meta. And while you may be correct that this leader effect in isolation is rather underwhelming, as of course there is a very specific type locking to which cards can be protected by your leader effect, and also taking your life is not a cheap cost either, the power of this deck comes in the cards that it's allowed to use. Specifically, the typing for this leader, being Sky Island and Straw Hat Crew in yellow, is very relevant. And like how we talked about the core card of Enel being the secret rare Enel, the core card, and perhaps the strongest card within this deck, is going to be the 5 cost secret rare Luffy. This Luffy is a 5 cost 7,000 power character, which if you have 6 or more lone cards on your field, this character gains Rush. Then when your opponent activates an event or blocker, reveal up to 1 card from the top of your life cards. This character gains plus 1,000 power during this turn per 1 cost on the card revealed. For those who may be a little bit confused on how this card works, this is an example. Let's say that you hit with this 5 cost Luffy and the opponent activates their 6 cost NL blocker. At this point, you reveal your top life card, and now, because it's 7 cost, you gain 7,000 power, meaning that now you're hitting 14,000 into the opponent's 10,000 power Enel instead of 7,000 power at the opponent's leader. This heavily disincentivizes the opponent from using blockers, similar to the 10 cost secret rare Roger. While you can use blockers or events into Luffy, it does make Luffy a lot scary to deal with. So this card, while being able to come out a little bit faster than Roger, doesn't have the absolute end game that Roger has. But against decks that have lots of larger blockers or events, ergo things like purple Enel, this card is going to be absolutely devastating. Having rush when you have 6 or more Dong cards essentially just means that you can't get rush when it's played on your 5 Dong turn when you're going first. With rush and an exceptionally powerful effect attached to it, makes a rather funny comparison to the other 5 cost 7,000 power rush ace. Really, Luffy's bounty has surpassed aces by a large margin. Still, this deck isn't just a 5 cost Luffy deck in the way that purple Enel is just a 6 cost Enel deck. This deck has a lot of very powerful cards that come together as a whole. That's why this deck doesn't seem very powerful on the surface, but when you start to play it, you'll realize how much power this deck actually has. These mid-sized characters can be a little bit awkward to play in the later turns 7, 8, 9 Dong. Thankfully, the 7 cost Robin saves that. 7 cost 7,000 with 1,000 counter on play, you may add the top card of your life cards to your hand. Then if your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, add 1 card from the top of your deck to your life cards and play 1 Sky Island type character with a cost of 5 or less from your hand. This 7 cost Robin very easily gets the 5 cost Luffy out of your hand and spreads out your board immensely, because when you play a 5 cost on your 5 Dong turn, whether it's the Luffy, Wiper, or Karagara, and Robin on the 7 Dong turn to play out another one of these 3 targets, you can very quickly build up your board, and thanks to your lead effect, it's extremely difficult to actually get rid of them. And while I do want to talk about Wiper, which is just a great counter into things like Enel, and also great buff to Yellow Karagara himself, I actually want to talk about the 5 cost Karagara, because there is a lot of debate on whether or not you should play the 5 cost Karagara or the 5 cost Nami. 5 cost Nami is an extremely powerful card in yellow as a whole. Many yellow decks are using it generically, so you would think that the Straw Hat yellow leader would use it. However, from my testing, I think that the 5 cost Karagara is going to be better, just due to the fact that with your leader effect, this card is not going anywhere. Playing the 5 cost Karagara on 5 Dong turn, then playing Nikorobing to move one of your life cards gives you another free draw, akin to having a blue-yellow Nami leader effect. Even if you don't have this Robin, however, just hitting into the opponent's leader and them eventually losing 1 life will give you 1 extra draw, and because this Karagara is so tricky to actually remove, you're constantly going to be drawing 2 cards per turn for the rest of the game, assuming that you have enough life to actually protect him. Really though, the main character of this show is Luffy and Robin. The 5 cost Karagara is what really makes this deck come together, so being able to find this card is very crucial in my opinion. So being able to find not only this 5 cost Karagara, but also the Robin and Luffy is very crucial in my opinion, which is why I'm running both the 2 cost Shira Searcher as well as the 4 cost Sanji Searcher. Essentially what you're looking to do is set up a rather big board very early on, and using the defensive tools that Yellow innately has, whether it's 5 cost Borsalino or the new 4 cost Zoro or Gum Gum Golden Rifle, to keep yourself healthy, to give yourself enough time to be able to win with the characters you have on your board. Playstyle of this yellow Luffy really closely resembles purple Luffy for people who have played that in the past. You have a Luffy Taro-esque character, you have a Sangoro-esque character, and you have a lot of defensive tools in the same way that purple Luffy had Gum Gum Giant. However, this yellow Luffy is going to naturally be a little bit more tanky. Once again, we talked about things like 5 cost 6,000 power blockers being very good into Enel, so the 5 cost Borsalino is very powerful, effectively mitigating 2 attacks, one with your life card and one with the Borsalino blocker himself. Now that you understand how this deck works, let's talk about some of the other cards that it has at its disposal. 5 cost Wiper flips one of your life cards face up and gives all the opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn, then KOs all the opponent's characters with 0 power or less. This effect is extremely good into Enel's 1 cost Priests, but can be countered somewhat if they play the 3 cost Holy. However, because the characters are reduced by minus 2,000 power, that Holy is going to be 4,000 power and much easier to take out. The activate main, once per turn, you can give 1 rested Dong card to your Sky Island type leader or character, which just gives you a little bit more damage to actually be able to get over the opponent's threats. This second effect is more relevant to Yellow Karagara as a leader to activate your leader effect, which makes him pretty strong, but if you want to hear about Karagara, that'll probably be in a separate video. Let me know if you want to see that. Still, setting up this Wiper early on, though, you don't have many interactions with having a Dong attached to a character or leader, because all of your characters and leader, aside from the 4 cost Sanji, are going to have that Sky Island type. You're very free to just get an extra Dong every single turn to get that little bit of extra damage, especially into some more annoying decks like 6,000 power leaders in Red Blue Ace. Deck is extremely good into removal decks, as well as specifically purple Enel, fittingly for the Rubberman himself, but struggles immensely into any types of leaders that can increase their leader's power or have very cheap removal. Blue Yellow Nami, for example, is a very difficult matchup for Yellow Luffy due to the fact that the 2-cost Nojiko or the 2-cost Zeus can very easily annoy and bully the 5-cost Luffys, Katagaras, etc., force you to grab one life, and your leader becomes 7,000 power, making it very difficult for you to actually find an aggressive angle on the opponent's leader, giving them enough time to be able to push back slowly with the characters that they have at their disposal. Red Blue Ace, similarly being 6,000 power with the potential to go up to 8,000 power, is very difficult to get over as well due to the resource advantage that he can accrue. However, aside from these matchups that increase their leader's power, I think that Yellow Luffy is extremely well situated in this meta, and because it has a somewhat favored matchup into Enel, which I don't think can be said for many other decks, I personally rate Yellow Luffy very high in this meta. So now moving on from one Straw Hat leader to the next, let's talk about a new, very interesting one-turn kill deck, Green Black Brook. Brook is a green-black 5,000 power leader with 4 life. Under the rules of this game, you do not lose when your deck has 0 cards. You lose at the end of the turn in which your deck becomes 0 cards. Activate main once per turn, trash 4 cards from the top of your deck, then if your deck has 0 cards, set up to 1 of your characters as active. Now, though the leader effect is fairly clear, there was a lot of confusion about if you could refill your deck with cards like the 1-cost Bansherry to therefore prolong the game and keep using your leader effect. The answer is no. Once you reach 0 cards in your deck, you're going to finish the game one way or another, either killing the opponent or dying yourself. Your leader effect essentially only activates once in a game, reactivating one of your characters, which is going to hit for 2 times, sometimes even 3 times, to try to close out the game on that turn that you go down to 0 cards in your trash. However, until that point, you're going to want to be using your leader effect every single turn to just dump more and more cards into your trash to make sure that you get down to 0 cards in your deck at precisely the correct timing. Now, I do have to preface that this is the deck that I have the least experience on out of the 6 leaders, so the information that I can give on this deck may be somewhat surface level. Still, what I can tell you about this deck from my testing is 2 things. 1, it's very, very easy to get exactly the cards that you need. And 2, your lethal blows are a lot of the times not really enough to actually close out the game. This deck is the closest that we've ever had to a one-turn kill deck, but because of the nature of how the One Piece card game works and how one attack means 1 life, it's very tricky to actually kill someone from 5 life if you don't have multiple characters on the board. This means that with this deck, you need to get the opponent down to at least 1 to 2 life to try to attempt to go for lethal with a character swinging for multiple times in a turn to close out the game. This means that you need to be somewhat comfortable in terms of your own life to make sure that you don't die, which is easier said than done for a 4-life leader that doesn't have easy ways to cheat out value, while also needing to be aggressive enough to get your opponent into that lethal range. So the card that's going to be the main finisher in this deck for the most part is going to be the new 7-cost Nightmare Luffy. This Luffy is truly a raid boss, which gains power the more cards that are in your trash. Apply each of the following effects based on the number of cards in your trash. If there are 10 or more cards, this character's base power becomes 9,000 and it gains plus 10 cost. If you have 20 or more cards during your opponent's turn, your leader's base power becomes 7,000. If you have 30 or more cards, this character gains plus 1,000 power. Essentially what this card is a 7 cost, which on the board is 17 cost, and in the late game, 10,000 power with 1,000 counter, while also making your leader 7,000 power, which is obviously, I don't have to say, extremely powerful. But getting 30 cards into your trash is very, very difficult and something that very few decks can actually do, with the main contenders being able to use this card being Green Black Brook, of course, as well as Black Crocodile, who's been able to use this card with some pretty good success in this set as well. This card just being a big attacker is going to be very relevant on the final turn with your leader effect when you're trying to get multiple attacks in on the leader to try to close out the game. And also by making your leader 7,000 power, it helps you stall a little bit more time to actually get to that point where you can close out the game with this card. All in all, it's the perfect card for this deck, but that isn't necessarily to say that it makes the deck whole, because it still feels like it lacks some power in the mid game. But what would make this 7-cost Luffy even powerful than it already is? Well, if it had Rush, of course. But surely that's a little bit too broken, right? Well, let me introduce you to the 8-cost Nami. This 8-cost 6,000 power character, on play, if your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, play up to 1 Straw Hat Crew type character with a cost of 7 or less from your trash. The character played with this effect gains Rush during this turn. This card in the Green-Black Brook deck is able to play out the 7-cost Luffy from your trash immediately onto the board, be given Rush while also having the other effects that Luffy already comes with. However, this card can play out any color, so if your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, I think it's really important to actually look at what types of 7-cost or less Straw Hat Crew type characters exist, as I think that this Nami, even though it's not essentially that broken right now has the potential to be insanely powerful in the future once the right support exists in a black Straw Hat leader. However, currently there aren't very many black Straw Hat leaders. There's purple-black Luffy, blue-black Usopp, green-black Brook, black Luffy, as well as black-yellow Luffy. Purple-black Luffy has the ability to play out things like the 7-cost Luffy Taro or the 6-cost Robin, which is pretty strong, but not necessarily game-breaking. Green-black Brook also has the ability to play the 6-cost Luffy, which we see is actually in the deck list that we're presenting for this leader. And black-yellow Luffy has the ability to play out the 7-cost Robin, being able to heal as well as gaining rush. This, I think, is probably the strongest usage of the 8-cost Nami currently, so I am still looking at ways to make black-yellow Luffy work, but building this deck is really, really difficult. I'm going to need Herboya's help on this. And unfortunately, there just aren't very many good blue Straw Hat 7 or 6 costs that exist right now, so we can kind of ignore blue-black Usopp. He's a Dressrosa type leader anyways, technically. Still, I really wanted to emphasize how powerful I think this 8-cost Nami card is, because it's one of those cards that, kind of like the 8-cost Isho, feels a little bit ahead of its time, where the card is insanely powerful, but the support isn't quite there yet, or the meta isn't quite there yet for this card to really, really shine. I'm excited to see what cards are going to be printed in the future, or if we get something like a red-black Straw Hat leader to do some truly diabolical things with the 7-cost Zoro going 9,000 power into the opponent's leader. Still, taking a few steps back to Brook, this deck really just wants to find the 7-cost Luffy on the board, get enough damage on the opponent's leader, whether it's through the 7-cost Luffy or the 6-cost Luffy. That can technically be a 6-cost 11,000 power rush if used in tandem with Nami alongside its own on-play effect, to get the opponent into a range where, with your leader effect, to restand one of your characters alongside something like the 6-cost Brook or Deadman's Game to clear the opponent's active Dong or blockers, is enough damage to be able to break through and close out the game immediately. Let's talk about the 6-cost Brook. This 6-cost Brook has the on-play effect to wrestling the opponent's cards. This can, of course, be one of the opponent's blockers or their Dong cards. Then activate main, you can trash this character, and if your leader has the Straw Hat Crew type, make one of your base 8-cost or less characters active. Dream for this deck, if you have enough time to be able to set it up, is to put one of these Brooks on the board beforehand and then activate this effect alongside your leader effect to get 2 free restands and hit for a minimum 10,000 power with that 7-cost Luffy, though with a couple of Dong going to be much, much bigger to close out the game without the opponent being able to really do anything about it. This alongside some other pretty solid Straw Hat cards like the new Pirate Docking 6 that can play a 2-cost or less Straw Hat onto the board from your trash, such as the 2-cost Zoro for more defense or the 2-cost Chopper to be able to effectively search for anything in a way, thanks to your trash being a second pool of cards you can just grab a card from, and the 4-cost Nami, 6-cost Brook, and Deadman's Game being able to help you close out the game on that final turn. This deck has a lot of very scary, surprising, explosive, lethal power, but the main issue for this deck is that it's very tricky to actually get into the position where you can really make those attacks count in the end. And while I don't necessarily rate this deck as high as some of the other decks as a sort of meta contender, I don't necessarily think that that really always matters unless you're a purely competitive player, because this deck is extremely fun. It's extremely explosive in what it can do, and will catch a ton of people off by surprise. Speaking of which, another leader that's probably going to catch a lot of people off by surprise due to the fact that so many people have written off immediately after reading the leader effect is Blue Rebecca. Rebecca is a blue 5,000 power 5 life leader. This leader cannot attack. Activate main, you may rest this leader and return one of your Dressrosa type characters to the owner's hand. Play up to 1 Dressrosa type character card with a cost of 3 from your hand. This leader effect is very unassuming at first. Not being able to attack in this economy is an extreme demerit, so you need to have an exceptionally powerful leader effect to be able to compensate for that. However, the leader effect doesn't necessarily seem that powerful either. Though yes, if you have a searcher on the board, you can effectively go up in hand side, getting the search off as well as the searcher back to your hand, but only being able to play a 3-cost can feel somewhat underwhelming considering the historical power of 3 costs within the One Piece card game. Plethora of 3 costs were printed in this set, whether it's the 3-cost Orombusu, 3-cost Keri Funku, Bobby Funku, Luffy, Sanji, or Kurosu, but really the only card of these options that you want to consistently keep playing out through your leader effect in the early game is going to be the 3-cost Kurosu. This Kurosu is a 3-cost 5,000 power character with the on-play effect to trash one of your cards, and if your leader is Rebecca, you gain Rush. Then on KO, this card returns back to your hand. And once again, you read this card and compare it to a card like the 3-cost Wrestler all the way back from OP01 and think, how is this card an OP15 card? It has a solid on KO effect, but having to trash a card to gain Rush can feel very brutal on a pretty mediocre 3-cost 5,000 power stat line. However, because you're playing Rebecca, this is not a 3-cost 5,000 power Rush character. This is a 1-cost 5,000 power Rush character, and because you're going to be probably playing a search beforehand before you get the Skittles effect off, the hand trash is actually more of a cycle, helping you get some bricks out of your hand that you don't necessarily want, whether it's extra copies of your stage or some top-end bricks that you may be playing. However, though this Kirosu may seem a little bit unassuming at first, because of the way that your leader effect works, it actually is the core card of this deck, being extremely powerful and helping you line up 5,000 power characters really quickly thanks to how easily you can cheat them out, and the incredible amount of resources that Rebecca can accrue. Rebecca and the blue Dressrosa package as a whole has two searchers, the 1-cost Viola as well as the 1-cost Rebecca. Both of these cards have the on-play effect of searching the top 3 cards for a Dressrosa type card for sending the rest to the bottom of your deck. Unlike the black 1-cost Rebecca, you can actually search other cards called Rebecca as well, so there's a lot of flexibility in the targets that you can pick up. The differentiation between these two new OP15 searchers is that Viola is a 2K, while Rebecca has a rather ridiculous second effect where if you have one dong attached to this character, it gains blocker. This 1-cost Rebecca, of course, reads very powerful, but it's actually even stronger in practice. Because you're just going to be playing out these cards as searchers, they may just end up on the board at the end of your turn. Just throwing one of your extra dong onto one of these characters when the opponent's going to go for a larger attack, whether it's the 6-cost Enel, Lucy, or the 9-cost Hancock, and absorbing the attack for essentially free after you've already filtered through your deck, gives this card so much flexibility, and any deck that can really abuse it, a lot of tankiness. Still, in Rebecca, these characters may not stay on the board for very long because once you bounce them back with your leader effect, you're going to be replacing them with something like the 3-cost Kirosu. The reason why the other cards like Orombus, for example, aren't really necessarily that good in this deck is because of the 4,000 power stat line. So therefore, cards like Blue Gilly or Sai from OP10 can be options as well to keep the aggression up, because really this deck is a lot more aggressive than it looks. Because you're cheating out some high value characters, though they're rather small, this deck functions somewhat similarly to Yellow Vegapunk. However, you have an insane number of resources thanks to your leader effect, and you also have 5 life to start with, making it a lot safer to actually play Rebecca while still having the aggression available through your leader effect being able to cheat out characters for very cheap. To really get the most out of Blue Rebecca, you're going to want to be maximizing your leader effect, and that means that you're going to want to be using your leader effect every single turn, playing out a character, bouncing it back for a 3-cost, and using the rest of your dong to either play out another character or attach the dong to really get a lot of hits in. This deck is a lot more aggressive than it looks on paper, and though we have talked a lot about bouncing back these searchers and putting down these really high value characters like 3-cost Kirosu, you don't necessarily need to bounce back these 1-cost characters to play out the 3-cost characters. You can even get 2 hits in with Kirosu, for example, by bouncing back the Kirosu that's already on the board and playing it immediately to hit one more time. These sneaky plays, as well as the 3-cost Sanji, an insane card in OP15, being able to come out of nowhere thanks to your leader effect to either end the game very quickly or get over the opponent's blockers and clear characters that they thought were safe, gives this deck a lot of outplay potential, making it very difficult but also very rewarding in my opinion. We've already spent half of the Rebecca section only talking about the leader effect. Let's talk about some of the other cards that are in this deck. Sabo is a 7-cost 9,000 power blocker, and on play, if your leader has the Dressrosa type, activate up to 1 Dressrosa type event from your hand. And Rebecca, because she has to run so many characters for her leader effect, doesn't have too many events that she really wants to be playing, especially because a lot of the good ones are in red, specifically for Red Blue Lucy, which we will talk about next. Deck essentially runs 8 copies of Sanji's Pilaf. The 3-cost go ahead and use him, Mr. Luffy, has the effect of either drawing you 2 cards or giving one of your Dressrosa type characters blocker. For example, on your 5 dong turn, you can play out a 1-cost searcher, bounce it back with your leader effect to play out a 3, play the 1-cost searcher that you just got back to your hand one more time, and using the last 3 dong to play out this new event to get an insane amount of cards into your hand while also developing a pretty strong board. A particular card of interest and one that you may be scratching your head over is the 7-cost Would You Let Me Eat the Flame Frame Flute? Is the 7-cost Meremere no Mi wa Ore ga Kutte Ii ka. This card has the main effect to draw 2 cards, then your Lucy leader gains double attack and plus 3,000 power during this turn. Then it also has the trigger to draw 2 cards. This card immediately seems completely useless in Rebecca because obviously Rebecca is not Lucy. However, the first part of this effect, drawing 2 cards, is usable by any leader. Still, 7 dong to just draw 2 cards is absurdly expensive, but really this card is used purely to be a target for the 7-cost Subble, meaning that the 7-cost Subble in this deck specifically doesn't necessarily read 7-cost 9,000 blocker, activate an event from your hand. No, it reads 7-cost 9,000 blocker, draw 2 cards on play. And while this is okay, for Blue Rebecca, just having more resources in your hand is what's going to end up winning you the game, so these sorts of effects are valid. On top of this, you also have the trigger effect as well for the lucky pull out of life, which will happen roughly 1 in every 3 games if you have a 5-life leader. Nonetheless, this card is purely used as a 7-cost Sabo target or fodder for the stage to give you a free plus 2k counter. The final event that the Blue Rebecca deck currently runs is the 5-cost Baribari Pistol. This slightly overpriced jet pistol is now finally good due to the fact that with your 7-cost Subble, it's still longer overpriced, it is free. So just having the utility choices between drawing more extra cards to push your agenda or reducing the opponent's aggression by bottom decking their 6,000 power or less characters is going to be how you're going to want to be using this insanely powerful 7 cost blocker in the 7 cost Subble. All in all, Blue Rebecca is a deck that's rather underrated simply based off of first impressions, but it has an exceptionally good matchup into Blue Yellow Boa Hancock as well as Red Blue Lucy. The Enel matchup I believe is also playable, and I think this will become better as people refine Rebecca's deck as well as her playstyle. But leaders that can increase their leader's power like Blue Yellow Nami or even things like Red Green Krieg do have a very good matchup into Rebecca simply due to the fact that all of her characters are very low in power. I think that if the Enel matchup becomes better for Rebecca, she can be a very solid meta contender, as the gameplay loop for Rebecca is really powerful, even putting you at threat of decking out sometimes. Really, decking out seems to be the Dressrosa special if you look back at things like OP04, and of course the other new Dressrosa leader in the Red Blue Lucy. Lucy is a red-blue 5,000 power leader with 4 life. When attacking or on your opponent's attack, you may trash any number of event or stage cards from your hand. This leader gains plus 1,000 power during this battle for every card trashed. Activate main once per turn. If you have activated an event with a base cost of 3 or more during this turn, draw 1 card. Lucy immediately pulls on people's heartstrings with how similar its effect is to Red Ace from OP03. Their effects are essentially exactly the same, except Lucy, of course being an OP15 leader, one leader effect is not enough, has a second part to it. If you activate any event that has a base cost of 3 or more, you can draw 1 extra card. What this means is that Lucy, like Rebecca, is an insane resource monster that also can use the 7 cost Subble much better due to having a lot of different options as well. And while Rebecca's core will generally revolve around the 3 cost Kirose, Lucy absolutely revolves around playing as many 7 cost Subbles in a row as possible. And generally decks that rely on seeing one single card can feel very binary and also very coin flippy. If you don't see your one card, you're going to instantly lose, which is obviously going to be true for Lucy as well. But seeing that one card in Lucy can be so many different things because it simply activates any Dressrosa type event from your hand. One thing to note also is that while your leader effect may give you 1 draw off of any event that costs 3 or more that's played, 7 cost Lucy can only play Dressrosa type events, so keep this in mind as well. Also remember that Gravity Blade tragically is not Dressrosa type. Lucy as a deck revolves on playing this 7 cost Subble as many times as possible once you reach that 7 dong turn to overwhelm the opponent with these free event effects while simultaneously drawing cards to stay healthy behind a wall of blockers. This leader is actually quite reminiscent to Red Blue Ace and how it plays due to the fact that this 7 cost Ace is very similar to how the 10 cost Newgate functions in Ace. Your early game is going to be looking around for either the 4 cost Cavendish or the 4 cost Paradoromeo. People have still not decided on which of these two is actually the correct answer for Lucy, and playing out the mid to late game spamming these 7 cost Subbles. But still, this 7 cost Subble has a lot of versatility in Lucy. The most obvious and strongest target is going to be the new 7 cost Fire Fist. Fire Fist has the main effect. Your leader gains plus 3,000 power during this turn and give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 8,000 power until the end of the opponent's next end phase. Then you may trash 2 cards from your hand. If you do, get up to one of your opponent's characters with 0 power or less. So really, this event has 3 effects that are rather mediocre, but altogether are very powerful because, of course, you're playing it for free off of a 7 cost 9,000 power blocker. It's an insane amount of value they're getting off of an already very well statted character, making your leader 8,000 power on this turn, giving one of the opponent's characters minus 8,000 power until the next turn, and also giving you the choice to be able to KO a 0 power character. Because this meta is so anti-removal, removal decks generally just don't exist within this meta. However, Red Blue Lucy is the single and strongest removal deck in the current meta due to the fact that you have easy access to Fire Fist. The second that one of the opponent's larger characters is rested, you can use this Fire Fist to reduce its power, bully it with some smaller attacks like with the 1 cost Viola, and simultaneously hit with your leader at 8,000 power to keep the aggression up on the opponent's leader as well, or hit into a different character to potentially KO 2 characters on the same turn. Even if you somehow fail to KO the opponent's character, whether it's through the amount of blockers that they may have at their disposal or them just dumping their entire hand to protect the character, or in the case of Luffy, of course, using their leader effect multiple times to be able to protect it, because the power reduction stays until the end of the opponent's next turn, even on the opponent's turn, that 6 cost Enel is only going to be 2,000 power. This means that really there isn't a wrong way to use Fire Fist because it's so flexible. Consider this, you're trying to KO one of the opponent's higher power characters that's rested. hand. You reduce its power, don't use the second part of Fire Fist, hit into with your smaller characters, and take it out for essentially free. Option 2, the character is active, but you need to get rid of it before they can attack. Then you can use the latter part of Fire Fist to KO the character and simultaneously potentially getting rid of 2 bricks from your hand. Or option 3, the opponent's character is too large for you to actually KO, or it can't be KO'd through effects like the 6-cost Enel, but you need to negate the attack anyways, so you purely use Fire Fist as a minus 8,000 power on the opponent's turn, effectively negating an attack. And this isn't even to mention that because this is an event that's being activated via the 7-cost Subble, if you play it off the 7-cost Subble, you are actually getting a draw after this effect as well. And one thing which is a little bit more technical, which maybe isn't suited for this video, is that in the mirror, you can, for example, reduce the opponent's 7-cost Subble to 1,000 power, then use the second part of the effect to KO the opponent's 1-cost Rebecca, which may potentially be a blocker right now. If you get rid of that blocker, then hit into the opponent's Subble, you can very easily get rid of 2 blockers in the same turn and really devastate the opponent's chances. The versatility in this single card alone makes Lucy very, very interesting to play, but that isn't the only target that you could play off of this 7-cost Subble. The other really powerful card to play off this 7-cost Subble is the Barrier Pistol, which was also in the Rebecca list, but it's much stronger within this list because this deck has access to red, and can use it in tandem with things like Just Watch Me Ace. This 4-cost event, if you have 4 or more events in your trash, give this card in your hand -3 cost. Then main and counter give one of your opponent's characters -3,000 power during this turn. 2 things of note is that this main/counter effect can only go to characters, as well as the card being base 4 cost means that you will still get the draw of your leader effect even though you're only playing it for 1 dong. Still, Just Watch Me Ace or even the 1-cost Ace Sabo Luffy SR in tandem with Body Pistol allows you to bottom deck a 9,000 power character with just 2 cards. In particular, in the mirror, you can respond immediately to the opponent's 7 dong 7-cost Sabo turn with Just Watch Me Ace into the 7-cost Sabo and Berry Pistol to get rid of the opponent's Subble while establishing your own. But really, both of these cards are removal events. So what do you do if the opponent either has a board that can't be removed, or they leave all their characters active to counter the potential effects of Fire Fist? Well, you have another event with a stupidly long name, Jesus Christ, which is, and no one else can have it. It's our memento of him. If your leader is Lucy, you can choose 1, draw 2 cards, and trash 1 from your hand, then play up to 1 Dressrosa type character with a cost of 4 or less from your hand, or remove up to 1 stage card to the owner's hand. This second effect is very specifically made to counter Black Ema, so we can disregard this in every other matchup essentially, where you're going to want to be picking the first effect. Drawing 2 and trashing 1 card is going to be nice to filter out some bricks from your hand. Also, of course, because it's an event, you get 1 extra draw from your leader effect after this effect fully resolves. But being able to play a 4-cost Dressrosa character off of this event means that your 7-cost Subble can technically be a 7-cost 9,000 blocker on play, draw 2, trash 1, play a 4-cost out of your hand, and then draw 1 more from your leader effect. Meaning that even if the opponent tries to counter you by making their board as unremovable as possible, you can simply spread your board out faster to start to push your agenda while the opponent's choosing not to push theirs. While there are a couple of other choices that you can play off of this 7-cost Subble, like the 7-cost Would You Let Me Eat the Flame Fruit, it's very good in the Hancock matchup, for example. These 3 events that we mentioned before are going to be the core of your game plan. Removing the opponent's characters that are rested, removing the opponent's characters that can be removed, or spreading out your board to push your agenda even further. Knowing which one of these cards to keep in your hand and which ones to trash with your leader effect is going to be a skill that you're going to have to learn depending on the matchups that you're fighting against, but this becomes more and more intuitive as you play against the decks. Still, because of your leader effect, none of these events are bricks, meaning that you can be very greedy with the number of events that you actually run. The versatility that this 7-cost Sabo provides doesn't make this deck feel like it's a 1-card deck, but has so much versatility that the opponent can't really account for or fully be prepared for because the possibilities can essentially be endless. Sabo as a deck can struggle into good NL players, but I think it does go 50-50 into Hancock, while also destroying decks like Blue Yellow Nami, so I think that it's very, very well situated within this meta, especially for 1v1 tournaments. However, the deck tends to struggle against things like the new Yellow Luffy due to the fact that the opponent's characters can't even be bottom decked, nor removed through combat, meaning that you're going to have to pump a lot of attacks in the opponent's characters to actually get rid of them. Still, even now with its list under heavy scrutiny, it's still an exceptionally powerful deck within the meta, easily top 5, if not top 3. That unfortunately cannot be said about the final leader that we're going to be talking about in this video. Finally, after an absurdly long video, which I'm very grateful for you guys watching, let's now talk about Green Krieg. Krieg is a red-green leader with 5,000 power and 4 life. Don't X1 opponent's turn. If your only characters on your field are East Blue type characters, give all of your opponent's characters -2,000 power. Activate main once per turn, rest up to one of your opponent's characters that has 2 or more Dong cards given. This is one of the most unique decks within the game because it has the new ability of being able to attach Dong onto the opponent's characters. Cards like the 1-cost jungle, which search the top 3 cards for a East Blue type card, also have the activate main effect of being able to trash this character and attach one of the opponent's rested Dong to one of their characters. If you use multiple of these types of effects together to give your opponent's characters multiple Dong, then you can activate your leader effect to rest it and then use a lot of your other cards to be able to manipulate it as well, due to the fact that green and red have a lot of ways to interact with rested characters. And while this jungle only attaches rested Dong, there are other types of effects that can attach active Dong as well. The perfect example of this is going to be the 4-cost Arlong. The 4-cost Arlong has an absurd on-KO effect, making it so that up to 2 of the opponent's rested cards will not become active in the opponent's next refresh phase, but also having the activate main once per turn to give one of the opponent's characters 1 rested Dong, then giving any Dong from a cost area to one of the owner's characters or leaders. This can be your own character to attach Dong to your leader to activate your leader effect, but it can also be attaching the opponent's Dong, and it can also be the opponent's active Dong, meaning that if they have a Gum Gum Giant ready, you can easily deny that with something like this Arlong's effect. Other key cards within this deck that have similar types of effects like the 4-cost Arlong are the 5-cost Alvida as well as the 5-cost Morgan. Both these characters can purely only attach rested Dong, but still having more ways to attach Dong to the opponent's characters, the merrier, because the boss character of this deck is going to be the 8-cost Don Kuriku himself. Kuriku is a 8-cost 9,000 power character with the on-play effect to give up to 3 of your opponent's rested Dong cards to one of your opponent's characters, then gaining Rush. Activate main once per turn. If this character was played on this turn, give all of your opponent's characters minus 1000 power during this turn for every Dong card given to that character. Now, firstly, this effect is generic, meaning that bare minimum, this card is going to be an 8-cost 9,000 power rush character that gives one of the opponent's characters minus 2000 power because you're going to be attaching 3 rested Dong, and then with the effect, you're going to be able to reduce its power by 1000 per each Dong that's attached. However, because you're playing Krieg and you have so many effects that we've already talked about, like the 4-cost Arlong and the 5-cost Morgan, you can get massive power reduction on the opponent's characters, potentially getting 5, 6, 7,000 power reduced on the opponent's characters, making it very easy to take back the opponent's higher power board. And really, this works very well with your leader effect. Your leader effect giving the opponent's characters minus 2,000 power on their turn makes it very difficult for these smaller characters to hit, meaning that if they want to close out the game, they're going to need to play out bigger characters. However, these bigger characters are at a big risk as well, because not only does this 8-cost Krieg exist, but also 7-cost Kuro act as means to be able to deal with these higher power characters as well. Kuro is a 7-cost 7,000 power blocker with the on-play effect to give up to 2 of your opponent's Dong cards. Note that this does not specify rested Dong cards to one of your opponent's characters. Then at the end of this turn, up to one of your opponent's rested characters with 3 or more given Dong cards will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. Though the 8-cost Dong Kuriku is the more permanent option to be able to get rid of the opponent's characters, the 7-cost Kuro acts as a very solid backup to be able to stall time while also being a blocker. But the reason why you don't see any Kuriku winning in Japan is that although he has a lot of really powerful cards, even though the opponent's characters are reduced by minus 2000 power, the opponent's leader is absolutely unaffected, which makes this deck, in a weird way, feel like one of the old 4-life leaders that have existed in the One Piece card game. If you look way back 2.5, even 3 years ago in the One Piece card game, 4-life leaders simply couldn't exist because of how fragile they were in comparison to 5-life leaders. The way that Bandai had to compensate for this was to give them a lot of extra resources to make them feel more like 5-life leaders, which is why 4-life leaders that have historically been good in the past are things like Red Green Law, which have a lot of resources to make for the lack of defense that they innately have. However, for Krieg, he has no such defense aside from being able to reduce the opponent's characters by minus 2000 power, which, don't get me wrong, is very powerful and is very good into decks like Hancock as well as Yellow Luffy. But this deck, despite having so many good tools at its disposal, just simply falls flat. It has basically everything you would want it to have, but it just can't get over the finish line. It doesn't have enough power to actually close out the game, but it does have some pretty solid ways to make it feel very scary until you somehow inevitably end up losing as Krieg, even though you had a really good opening. This deck simply just fizzles out a little bit too fast, which is why, although in theory and on paper it's an extremely good deck, it's just not quite good enough in this economy anymore with so many leaders that are fighting with resources and not their board. This deck also does feel like it's a little bit inconsistent sometimes, where if you find that 8-cost Krieg, you're really chilling, but if you don't play multiple of them in a row, you could be struggling. The 1-cost jungle only being able to search 3 cards on top of your deck really doesn't help this either. So although you have lots of ways to get Dong onto the opponent's characters, if you don't find this 8-cost Krieg, you really aren't doing too much, which is very fitting for Krieg, where he is the strongest man in the East Blue, at least according to himself. But Fittingly, like the strongest man in East Blue, he does simply topple over to simple tricks. Maybe having more consistent power reduction on the opponent's characters would be a good way to buff this leader up, but until then, unfortunately, I feel like this deck is going to be the worst of the new leaders in OP15. Now that we've talked about all 6 of the new leaders in OP15 and potentially how they may settle into the meta with the tier list in mind that we showed at the very beginning of this video. This video up until this point has been a week and a half endeavor using all of my free time outside of work for this one video. If you've been watching it up until this point, I think that means that you enjoy the video, so consider subscribing. Even if you don't use your subscription tab, it helps me out. It lets YouTube know that you enjoy the video. This is probably going to be the most important section of the video. We've talked about all of the leaders, and you'll probably get a general sense of how good they are based on the descriptions or my overall enthusiasm for the leaders. But now let's talk about how the meta is going to actually fit together, because the meta isn't just going to be how the new leaders interact with each other, but of course how the leaders are going to interact with the old meta. At the very beginning of this video, we talked about how some of the meta leaders have shifted from OP14 to OP15, but you'll notice that I put things like Blue Yell Nami and Purple the Flamingo in A tier. So in this section, I'm going to talk how I feel about these top tier decks within the meta and how they interact with each other. And I won't go through every leader that's on this list because that could be an entire separate video, but I'll talk about some of the ones that are more interesting, and maybe in a separate video, I'll talk about some really, really interesting leaders like, for example, Blue Yell Nami, which has so many different types of versions that I still don't know what the correct one is. Still, let's start with S tier. I think that Enel is by far the strongest deck in this meta. If you take first, I don't know if there's many decks that you actually end up losing to as Enel unless they're decks that specifically are designed to beat Enel. If you manage to open your turns with the 1 cost Olmu into the 3 cost Holy into the 6 cost Enel, I don't really think that there are very many matchups you can end up losing because of how much aggression and power this deck actually ends up having. I think that this is the new deck that you have to worry about when you're considering OP15, and it's going to be the centerpiece for all deck building. It's for this reason that a lot of these decks are going to be pretty good on paper, but due to their Enel matchup, are going to be lower or higher in the tier list depending on whether or not they have a good or bad Enel matchup. The second leader on this list is Blue Yellow Boa Hancock. Blue Yellow Boa Hancock is another leader that, like Enel, you need to respect when you're thinking about which deck you're going to end up bringing to a tournament. I personally feel that this matchup is slightly favored for Enel, but it's not a huge difference, meaning that both of these decks can survive within the meta while being very oppressive to a lot of the other decks that exist. If you were to oversimplify the meta to the absolute bare bones, it's purple Enel and decks that can abuse Borsalino. Weirdly, Vegapunk is not good despite being the best 5-cost Borsalino user. Unfortunately, just 2 life right now is very tricky when you have things like Holy that's going to be hitting you for 9,000 power double attack from turn 2. Still, Hancock is going to be a stable meta pick, but I do think that this deck could potentially come down as people refine the OP15 decks and, of course, the ban list. We don't know what's going to be in the ban list yet, but that's, again, sorry, I keep talking about other videos, but that's going to be another video talking about the cards that potentially could be banned, because there are probably going to be hits to the Boa Hancock deck, and depending on which cards are hit, like the 4-cost Pudding, I can see this deck losing a lot of power within the meta. Yellow Luffy is a deck that I personally potentially overrate, but I think that a lot of people are actually underrating. This leader simply just has a lot of really good stuff and has cards that are specifically designed to do well into purple Enel. Still, even if you're not fighting Enel, the fact that you can do 7-cost Robin into the 5-cost Luffy, develop 2 7,000 power bodies, one of them being one of the craziest cards that we've ever seen in yellow in the 5-cost Yukari Luffy, really makes it so that this deck has a lot of explosive potential, makes it difficult for the opponent to actually counter it, because a lot of times that you deal with these yellow decks is to deal with the opponent's board, while being incredibly tanky as well, thanks to things like the 4-cost Zoro as well as the 5-cost Borsalino. Really, this deck is just the sum of its parts, and is quite refreshing because it's not one of the decks that feels like it's broken because it has insanely broken and oppressive cards, but rather a deck that's just very solid all around, a well-rounded deck that has pretty good late game, pretty good early game, pretty good survivability, and pretty good defense. It just has above average stats in all sectors, and therefore it's just a good deck that I think a lot of people are underrating because on paper it doesn't have anything that's completely broken. The next deck on the tier list is Blue Yell Nami, and actually from my testing, Blue Yell Nami beats all 3 of the top decks in purple Enel, Blue Yell Hancock, and yellow Luffy. The only reason I'm not putting this deck higher is because there's a lot of Lucy around right now, and Lucy is a very, very bad matchup. Still, if you're looking to just target the top meta as well as some other random things that could be running around, then I think that Blue Yell Nami is in an extremely good place. Very cheap bouncing effects like the 2-cost Nojiko are insanely powerful into Luffy, but even so, just making your leader 7,000 power is very solid into both Hancock as well as Luffy. This alongside having access to, of course, the Borsalino that we've talked about way too many times in this section already, as well as other healing tools and your leader effect being able to give you back resources when you peel either the opponent or your own life, makes this deck incredibly tanky and able to out-survive any of the decks that are lower to the ground, which is very common in OP15. The one that people would be really surprised about hearing is that it does well into purple Enel. I thought that there was no way that this would work, because really the way that you beat Nami is to create power lines that are higher than 7,000 so that the opponent's leader effect doesn't actually end up mattering. So on paper, you'd think that this matchup is completely winning for Enel, not even worth trying. And that was kind of the boat that I was in the beginning as well. However, interestingly, there's a lot of lines that this deck can take because you have so many resources and you have so much time that eventually you can overrun Enels, especially those who run the 6-cost blocker. I should also mention for Enel that some people are replacing the blocker Enel for the 6-cost Resonante and Law, which I can see for sure, maybe a little bit worse in the mirror, as well as the red-blue Lucy matchup, but still an interesting tech to keep your hand healthy because these other Enels make you go down in hand size. And so as Nami is just doing her job in surviving as long as possible, whether it's through her leader effect to ignore the opponent's smaller attacks that'll come out of the 1-cost as well as leader, healing thanks to the 5-cost Forcelino, the 7-cost Robin, or potentially the 8-cost Moria if you're running the Thriller Bark package, and slowly but surely chipping away at the opponent's life. Eventually, somehow, someway, this deck can overcome Enel, which is why I think it's very, very good within this meta. Nami wasn't good before because the Ema matchup was very bad, and the power line of cards like the 10-cost Newgate in Red Blue Ace were very, very tricky to get over. But as the meta has shifted to be more mid-rangey, cards like the 4-cost Perona can absolutely devastate Enel, and the 7,000 power leader is the icing on top into these other meta decks. And so while I think that Blue Nami is specifically in a very good spot right now, of course, it doesn't have a good matchup into Lucy, who can destroy the opponent's board with power reduction. Lucy is extremely competitive with Blue Nami in terms of the amount of resource that he has. However, while Lucy has the new Fire Fist, Nami is unfortunately going to be losing Red Rock soon due to rotation. That makes this matchup quite difficult, and Lucy's going to be in a pretty comfortable spot as the premier removal deck, now that red removal is much stronger than black removal due to all of the anti-removal effects that exist within the game now. Lucy, I think, is extremely consistent, though it is a 1-card deck. You have a lot of ways to draw into that 7-cost Summel, and has extreme versatility in the way that you can play out the deck as well as the way that you can build it as well. So I'm sure that the final version of Lucy is not going to look anything like what people are using currently. Still, this deck from my testing has a bad matchup into Enels, who are very good at the game, but has a 50-50 matchup into Hancock. The matchup that I actually think is worse for Lucy is the yellow Luffy matchup, because his leader effect is going to be able to protect his characters. So I think that this deck is very good all around, but I don't necessarily think it's as good maybe as its play rate may reflect. Still, because Blue Nami is very popular right now and has a very good matchup into Nami, I can justify this deck being in A tier, but I don't necessarily see it as a top 3 deck. Purple Doflamingo is another deck which is again one of my cope decks. I really like to play cope decks, and Purple Doflamingo with the 10-cost Doflamingo is very good for the same reason that Blue Nami is good. The 10-cost Doflamingo being able to lock 3 of the opponent's 7-cost or less effectively blocks anything in this meta essentially, because all of the cards are lower in cost. Slowing down the game with your leader effect, redirecting the opponent's larger attacks into your characters to stall time gives you the time to build up your board with things like the 8-cost Doflamingo and close out the game with things like the 10-cost Doflamingo. Now, I will say that this deck doesn't necessarily have an insane matchup into any of the top decks, but I do think that it can fight on par with all of them, so I think that it's just a pretty solid above average deck, which is why I think that it's a pretty confident low A tier deck. Other than this, really, we've talked about most of the decks that I want to talk about within this meta. Most of the things that are lower in this tier list are not really worth talking about just in terms of their play rate. They're not really part of the conversation of the meta currently. I do think that Yellow Katagara is much better than his play rate may reflect because he's very aggressive and the new Sky Island cards are very, very strong in Katagara. I'll withhold my analysis on Katagara until he starts to pop up a little bit more in popularity. Still, these are the top leaders, in my opinion, in the meta right now and are going to be shaping what people are going to be playing, picking, and building for in this meta. Thank you guys so much for watching this incredibly long video. It's the longest that I've ever spent filming, researching, and editing a video. So I would really appreciate if you were to like and subscribe, share this video with someone who may enjoy it. And once again, as a reminder, 33,333 subscribers. It's going to be time for me to do YouTube full time. It might be a scary journey, but I am actually excited for it a lot because I have a lot of incredible plans in mind for if and when that plan comes to fruition. Any ideas that you probably have in mind right now for what I may be able to do, I promise I'm probably going to do something a lot bigger. So I hope that you're as excited as I am. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is not very cost effective. I have about 4 videos recorded that I need to edit, so I'll start to get those out quickly. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.